Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit subscribe and like to get latest update on my YouTube channel. For some professional stuff, do follow me on my LinkedIn account so that we can be acquainted on some professional things out there. And for the GitHub account, Shahid Hair Business, you can follow those published code that are generally available here on my account for you guys to just quickly download and get the source code that we are demonstrating in these videos. So quickly having insight into the Cartesian product. Normally we have SDLC process, and in the SDLC process we are in a way to determine and specify what a software system must be able to perform. So the requirement gathering session is involved for carrying out stakeholders interviews, accessing user requirements, and creating practices and specifications. For technical writer role, we are going to introduce some outlining the resources and meeting with the stakeholders, gathering functional requirements, documentation, listing assumptions and requirements, and get approval for those product variations and scenarios that are being discussed in that session. For today's session of the stubs and the product variation and scenarios, I'm going to host a URI here, and I will be introducing a function for the host application that will be the make call. For some stubs related things, I will be introducing a request object, and that request object is supposed to have some inputs like code, and that code is meant to be some numeric value, and we have some info to be posted by the client application, and that will be some text format. The host application is going to read that information and giving response to that object received. Will be responded in a way that we will be first checking if there is any error. So we are going to return that error with some boolean value, true or false. In case it's true, then we will be returning a dataset having some error details, and that error details shall be having information like error data. I will name it like this, and error data will be containing some status information, and that will be some numeric value for us as the business user has discussed those information with us, and we are just instantiating those things that we usually perform in our daily session with the business users. So make it so quick and make it so intuitive. In this video, I'm going to just transform all these things into some technical things for the developers to do the things in convenient way. For Cartesian concept, I'm going to have some demonstration in a dataset which we are going to demonstrate here with some request object where we have two parameters to receive at the host side. So the host side will be going to verify that those parameters passed might be some null set. There are possibilities that we might be having that null set, and we might be having some empty set. That's another assumption, that the user of this host might be passing us an empty set, and we might be receiving only code information. So that's another optional set that we are just considering to be received at this host application, and we have an info only information optional set that might be sent by the client application utilizing this service. And last but not the least, we might be having both information, and I will be calling it a mandatory requirement set that will be sent by the client application. Product variation, we are assuming that we might be having some flag information. Sorry for the spelling mistake. That's our flag information, that we are going to have some variation in the form of code, that we might be having some 0 or 1 value or anything like that. So that variation is going to be handled here. So I'm just writing that information. For some scenarios, I'm just expecting that we might be using n-tier architecture in the code, and we might be using some design patterns. So we are just going to type it, and just I'm going to maximize this thing now so that we can get a good insight of those things that we are writing here. So might be getting some pre-processing directives before going into the actual implementation, and I might be having some headers information that might be our security headers. In this form, in this code, we are not going to demonstrate that security headers. So we are just going to the product Cartesian product stuff. So we might be having those things, so I'm just going to note it down for you guys, so that we might be considering all those things while implementation is going on. So we might be having some validation and verification, we might be having some code block like try, catch and find any block. So these things must be considered in the scenarios we are going to address in this implementation. There might be some tracing that is implemented in the IS or the log manager stuff that is being going to be addressed here. So I'm going to also include some dependency SOA in my case. So let's quickly build our Visual Studio solution in the IDE provided by the Microsoft, and I'm going to create a new project for this demonstration, and that demonstration shall be selecting a predefined template provided by the Microsoft, and I'm going to use ASP web application in the .NET framework 4.8, and I will be going to name it application web application CP Cartesian product, and the 4.8 framework will be selected for that. You can use a higher core 8 version for your ease of use. So far so good. We are going to select web API for this. You can also choose other MVC, web forms, MT or single page application. For this demonstration we are only using web API RESTful HTTP service. So I will hit create. So the application is ready for us, and just going to add a quick reference for our SOAV application, that from our handle collection code that we have hosted on GitHub as well. So the SOAV is included in that, and I'm going to add SOA folder so that I can make those objects in my SOA folder namespace. In fact, from the visual perspective, I'm just going to quickly build those objects that I have to be. So these are I was supposed to be in my object. These are the 4 objects I'm going to quickly create in this folder now. So I'm just going to add a class that will be my C# code, and I will be calling it request object. That's my request object, and I'm going to add few things in that, and those information will be some code and info. So I will say that it's my public access integer type, and that's my code. Header and getter and setter, some co-piloting stuffs are being loaded. So next thing is our public accessibility string type info that is being passed to this host application. For some response object creation, there is a dependency that we are going to create. That's my error data, and I'm going to add that error data first, so that the dependency of that object is satisfied before going into the response object. And the error data is supposed to be containing some information that is status and message. So we will be giving it a public access. That's the public access. That's our integer type for the status, and our getter setter method will be intact here, and I will be giving a public access string type message attribute in the form of getter setter method to this error object. So for the response object, I'm going to create another CS class, and that will be containing our rest of the dependencies that we are going to include in our service response. That it should be containing a boolean type public access error attribute in the form of getter setter method, and a public accessibility error data object with some name data, and I'm going to instantiate it over here with some new object. So far so good. So that's my build result. I'm going to fix this warning message, and it says that it must be some 64-bit, and I'm going to address that part. In the properties, I'm going to conduct that build. Any CPU, I will go to 64-bit, and for a quick build, and the error is vanished. So now just create our class Cartesian product for the main functionality that being exposed method in our web service, RESTful web service. I will call it a Cartesian product class, so that we can demonstrate rest of the thing in this class. And that class is going to have some public static method. Sorry for that. Yep, it's a public static response object will be there, that will be imported from that namespace, and I will be calling a make call method, and that make call method must be having some request in fact as an input type, and I will be just calling it request object, and that request object shall be returning null to initially make things perfectly fine at this level. So for a quick view, I have defined some region, and in this region I am going to have some fidelity assurance. We have to give some validation and validate and verify region, and we have some response enumeration, and we have some response object to define here. I'm just quickly going to get into that controller, value controller, and just define my method here as we defined it over there in our previous discussion, and we are going to have it an HTTP post type method, and that will be routed to the route we are going to define here, and that route is going to be our host / make call, right? And I'm going to name it a public accessibility that will be having return time response, and that will be my make call method, and I will be getting some request object inside it in a form of req est, I will say that. Yep, and I have got this method ready, and I'm going to return something here from that object that we are just working with, that SOA dot Cartesian product class, and there will be a make class method, and that will be given that request object that we are going to receive on this method, and it will be returning our response object. Yeah, there is a spelling mistake, so let's have those things. I will just quickly run this project to give you a demo into it. So our page is loaded now. This is the home page, and this is our API page, and this is our parameter that is being instantiated here. These are the sample inputs, and the sample response is pretty much there with us now. For some response, I have just run this with empty, and that's being responded with some null value that we have returned. So ensuring into our response that the null is not responded, we are going to have some fidelity assurance, and we are going to create a response object quickly here so that our null value isn't being responded to the client application at any time that we have any type of situation being faced. So I will say that the error is set to be true, and I am going to instantiate it with some values that will be some data, and that data is going to have some information in that, and the information will be some status, I guess so, and status is going to be 1, and I'm going to give some message, and message is going to be from our response enumeration. I have just included that from our SOAV, that's our included in that part, and these are the predefined values that we are going to agree with our customer when we are just having that initial discussion with our client, and I'm going to make it a string value, and just quickly close it with that. So I'm just going to name it RESP, and that response shall be returned with each case we are going to work with henceforth. Just quickly intro inside of it, we have got some numeric values in descending order, -9, -8, -7, and so on. That will be 0, and that will be the one response that we are going to have understanding with the client. For some validations, we need to have some conditional statement here so that our input is being validated at every level that is being provided to us. I will say that that's my error type, and that error type will be imported from our validation class, and that error type shall be imported. I'm just quickly giving the reference to it now. So that's my validation SOAV validation, and that input is supposed to be in our request object, and that request object will be validated in that part that we might not be having some empty values in that. So for error request, we are just going to have some request object being instantiated here that we are going to respond in this part of the world, and I will say that the code should be initialized if we receive some empty parameters here. So I'm just initializing it, and there might be some error types that we might be facing in our other inputs that are being provided in our request object. So request object might not be empty or null, but we might be having some code restrictions that might be empty or null. And in another case, we will be understanding here that we might be having some error type in a way that error format, I may say that we want the user to provide us the information in at least 3 characters. So we have implemented that limitation in the error format now. So these error limitations are being satisfied here. So now we are going to have our error enumeration to be instantiated here in a way that we can get some intel from that enumeration in the form that we need. So we are going to have some response enumeration here, and that will be provided to our getEnum value object, and I will be passing it request code. So I will be getting that object value, and I will be having rest of the things in the form of in the flag. I will say that flag will be having something being obtained from the get value ID, and I will be passing that object to it, and I will be having that flag ID. And for the response message, I will be creating an object message, and I will be converting that object response to string to get our string instance. So finally, I am going to instantiate my response object with the value being processed with our inputs, and dynamic responses will be generated at this level, where we are going to have some code here that will be defined with some error, and that error will be a little bit tricky here. I'm going to use shorthand at this point of time, and I will say that I must be having some response code validations here, and if is this, then we are going to make it falsified, and else case I'm going to make it a return true value. So that's my error, and I'm going to instantiate data in the similar way that I have got some request code equality sign equal to 0, and if it's null question mark, sorry, I'm just going null, return if it's a falsified, and else case we are going to return in some new error data, and the new error data will be having some information in the form of a status that we have given in the form of flag or above in our code, and the rest of the things we will be just passing it to. I'm just going to make that access global in a few minutes. So I'm just going to make the scope in my tangibles now to these variables to make it accessible in the private scope, and I'm just going to create a private static int type flag, a getter setter, and it will be a getter setter, yeah, and I'm just going to make a private static string msg, and that's my a getter setter. So these will be accessible over there. The query is gone, and this is my tangibles region, and that's my response enumeration region. The flag is okay, and we have got the message that will be an msg. So that's it for this demonstration. So let's run the code and see what the response is there. And this is our make call method, and these are the outputs that we are going to have with the input samples. So just demonstrate to you guys, I'm just going to run this code now with those inputs that we have in the Cartesian product object. So these are the responses that we are going to receive now: a null set, an empty set, and the rest of the things will be like this, that we are going to pass this object into that sample instance with these inputs, and with sample instance with those inputs that we are expecting now in the form of the inputs that is being required, and we are just going those samples that we have decided, and we are just having the responses from the sources that we have configured. So far so good. So I'm just going to input the last value here when we are having success values, and that's the response. Thank you for watching this video, and do connect with me for the next video session. Thank you. Bye bye.